This video, we have a special guest. His name is Vincent. He's a vice president engineering at Later. In this video specifically, we're going to take a look at how he go from a software engineer to a VP engineering and how to become one. Throughout this video, if you have any questions, please comment down below. Now, if you do enjoy this video, please like this video and also subscribe. Welcome, Vincent.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, awesome. So for the first question is, could you give us introduction about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Vincent. I am currently a VP of engineering at Later. I have been in the industry for close to 20 years. I started off as a developer after I graduated from Simon Fraser University in computer science, and I worked in a number of different places. In the last 7 years prior to joining Later, I was at a company called Vizier, and I was there for close to 7 years. And seeing kind of the growth of the company and throughout that duration. Prior to that, I was at Apple for a few years, and then before that, I was at Electronic Arts. And so that's kind of like a little bit about kind of my journey, in the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before you were a software engineer, you were also a research and development. Could you tell us a bit more about that? A bit more like what do you do as a R&D developer?
Yeah, so I'm happy to. And so that's probably referring to when I was at SFU. I was doing a little bit of kind of the research type work. At the time, I was kind of debating whether I should go into research or should I go into the private sector. And I certainly did a number of things there. I was looking at, I guess back then it was called bioinformatics or biomedical imaging. And yeah, had a lot of fun there. And so I would say the research experience is a little bit different, and you're more focused on reading, scientific papers, trying to kind of come up with algorithms that actually kind of would be innovative, and kind of a little bit different from, I guess, in the private sector since then. Where you'll be more focused on building things. And of course, in the last little while, I've been more involved in the management side of things. Getting teams, building teams, getting teams to be as effective as they can be, and then launching product. So slightly different.
Got it. Sounds great. And also, you mentioned that you were a software engineer in Apple. Like, what was the position in Apple before you left? Was it
good question.
Yeah,
so
was
I
it
was
a tech lead, or was it a senior, or was it like already a manager level? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would say that my management experience, like a true people management experience, started when I was at Vizier. So prior to that, I was responsible for a number of things. At Apple, I was mostly as an individual contributor, and so I was working at the Vancouver office. And back then, not many people know about the Vancouver office. We were working on a number of things. But as with Apple, Apple usually kind of enjoys the secrecy. So I probably won't go into too much detail about the specific things that I at that time.
Yeah. Sounds good. Awesome. And what was the motivation, transition from a IC to a manager level? What motivates you to make that transition?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I think there are a few things. I think the number one thing is impact. And as a developer, even if you are very good at programming and very good at designing systems, at the end of the day, the impact or things that you can contribute is really limited to the amount of time that you have as a individual. As a manager, you can actually influence quite a number of things. And so when you manage a team or when you manage teams of teams, the things that you do can really hugely influence on the productivity of the individual team members. And so their impact is huge. As a result of that, when you work on projects or drive these kind of different initiatives, the impact on the company that you work in is really quite huge. And so that's really the main motivation when I was thinking about, hey, maybe I should actually pursue a management path.
Got it. Awesome. So the next question that I have for you is the responsibility for being a VP of engineering. What do you do as a VP engineering, and what kind of problem do you face or do you solve? And also, what's your daily and weekly routine look like as a VP of engineering?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will, I guess, start by kind of like talking about a daily, weekly routine. And the short answer is like, as a VP of engineering, there really is no specific team. A lot of times, you are kind of participating in kind of initiatives that really require your attention, and so it's not really following a particular routine. And so, and as with like any positions where you're managing large teams. And so, I mean, of course, I mean, there are particular focus or things that you would do as VP. As VP of engineering, your main focus really is to make sure that the teams are as productive, as efficient as possible. And partnering with product team to kind of come up with the best product, as quickly as possible, and with the quality that you want. And of course, I mean, a huge part of being the VP of engineering or head of engineering is to make sure that people are happy. And I mean, I always believe that engineers, developers that are happy, they are the most productive. And so making sure that people are motivated, engaged, that's a huge part of the role. Another main part of the role is with recruiting. And so especially now when there are a lot of companies competing for talent, recruiting becomes very challenging. And so finding the right people to join the company and for the right reason is actually a huge part of being a VP of engineering.
I see. And then you hiring, either developers or, software engineer managers. What are some things that you actually look for when you mentioned like hiring the right person?
Great question. A lot of times, like companies, they software companies, especially when they hire developers, they really evaluate just kind of the technical skills, almost like in terms of the system designs, in terms of like knowing the programming language, in terms of solving algorithmic type questions, like brain teasers type questions. And I think, I mean, there are times and places for that, but I think, I mean, it's also not really reflective of the day-to-day of a developer or engineer. A lot of times, like how people spend their time really is in collaborating with other team members, maybe within the team, but also with other functions too, maybe with product team, maybe with UX team. And so that is actually a huge component, and more than just kind of like trying to solve a particular kind of lead code type. And so when I hire, I look for a few. So I think one key thing that often stands out to me is whether this person really is has the ability to learn new things. Are they naturally curious, or are they they're just like studying whatever that's given to them, and or maybe just grinding lead code. And I think those are three very different kinds of developers, right? So people who are naturally curious, they often become best developers I have.
Got it. My other question is the pros and cons. So what are some of the benefits for being a VP of engineering, and what are some challenges?
Yeah. So I think one big benefit is what I mentioned before, kind of the impact. And you do feel a level of accomplishment when you see that the teams that you build, that you put together, that you enable, they are successful. And so I think that relates to kind of the almost like the software development background or engineering background that I have, where I mean I really enjoy the process of building. So it may be building teams, it may be building code, it may be building software, and so that's really a big impact. And as a result of like some of the functions or responsibilities that I mentioned earlier, you also need to sort of like build network with other, and so that may be challenging for some, but that's also sort of like a benefit as well. I mean, you get to meet all these amazing folks and try to kind of get them to build something great together.
I see. So the next question is how to become a vice president of engineering. Could you give us a bit more like what's the plan, what's the roadmap look like? What does it take, and what are some skills required?
So it's hard to say plan or roadmap. I think everyone takes a slightly different path. But oftentimes, let's say someone is interested in taking up on a management role. How do they start? I would say, I mean, typically it starts with maybe some sort of mentorship, mentoring. Someone who's more junior than yourself. And I mean, at some point, I mean, you become like a team lead, right? Maybe a technical lead, maybe working with one or two folks on your team, and mostly focus on the technical aspect. And as the journey progresses, I mean, maybe you become a manager, and where you are, more responsible for kind of like growing the talent team. Maybe you start to have hiring responsibility and performance management responsibility. And as the kind of journey progresses even more, you may become manager of managers, and where you are now responsible for kind of like multiple teams, and you no longer get involved in almost like the day-to-day operation. Maybe you will only look at code reviews that are of importance or significance, and you may only be involved in like large kind of like system designs that are has a lot of impact on the organization. Most of your focus may be on kind of making sure that the initiatives that the organization is responsible for are running smoothly and so on. And at some point, I mean, if you continue to go down that path, and you become like a director role or eventually kind of like a VP. In terms of skills, I mean, I think there are a number of different skills. I mean, I think it is important for someone to have that technical background to really understand kind of the language, right? And so because like a lot of times when you make decisions, going back to systems related decisions or technical decisions, it really kind of draws on the knowledge that you have. And so otherwise, I mean, the team members that you have, they may not necessarily respect you as well. So I think the technical side of things, I mean, I think that's one thing. But also, working with people. And I think communication is very important. And how do you actually communicate? How do you actually motivate people? How do you actually keep people engaged? Very, very important.
And my next question is, like, in terms of the advice for other software engineer managers or leaders out there, what advice do you have for them? Like, what are some things to consider or must do, or some things to avoid, and any regrets maybe that you learned in the past? Also, like any other like recommended resources.
Yeah, things to consider. I mean, that's a great question. I think oftentimes when people think of being a manager, they may be under the impression that, if you become the manager, you will get a lot more money. Maybe the salary will be a lot higher. And that's not really necessarily the case. I mean, a lot of times you can become a kind of a senior developer or principal developer, whatever it may be, depending, the titles doesn't really matter. But when you stay as an individual contributor, oftentimes you may actually get a lot more money or higher salary. And so, I guess like the message there is like, if you are wanting to be a manager because of money, that may not be the right choice. And the other thing is like, you may think that, if you're the manager, you can have kind of control over everything. And that is also not the case. I mean, first of all, that would make you a really bad manager, and you'll become a micromanager. And so a lot of times even for folks that are reporting to you, you're most likely trying to nudge them in a certain direction. You're giving suggestions, you're giving mentorship, you're providing some guardrails, but you rarely can kind of demand or kind of force people to do. And so if you believe that you have a lot of power or a lot of control just because you became a manager, that's also not true as well. And so in terms of, I guess, like, recommended resources, and I think there are a number of books that I like. One of the books that I often recommend to people is a book called The Manager's Path. I really like that book. I've recommended it to a few people already. People, it goes through kind of the journey of going to different levels of management, how this individual also kind of like came from a development background and go all the way to, I guess, like, CTO or VP of engineering. So that's one thing that I would recommend.
Mm-hmm. I see. Now, in terms of like regrets, like, do you have any regrets for any lessons that you learned along the way that you want to share with us?
In terms of like regrets, I wouldn't say regrets. I mean, I think just because of like there's only 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, and how you spend your time, right? And so, like, being a manager, you do spend a lot more time in meetings, for example. You may be spending more time in project management tools. You may be spending more time in spreadsheets and working on headcount allocations or whatever it may be. And so you do spend less time on the technology side. You spend less time in coding. You do spend less time in maybe just reviewing designs or doing code reviews. And so that's something that to consider, I guess. And so, I mean, obviously there are mitigations. I mean, there you can kind of like continue to keep up on the technical side on your own, maybe on weekends, like do some side projects still, just like people who just started a career. I mean, I think it's useful to keep up. And so, I mean, it's very important for anyone in any position, really, either you're VP or director or just or team lead, to continue to make sure your technical skills stay up to date. Because I often say, like, your skills, like 4 years from now, is probably worth half the value that they have today. That's very.
I see. And next question is, same thing, but like, what are some advice for like individual contributors, things that that you would recommend or that you will like individual contributor to improve, and also, like, again, like any recommended resources as well.
Yeah, great question. So I think for individual contributor, I think that the main value that you bring into a software organization is your technical abilities, right? And so technical ability is one, and also the ability to collaborate well with others, to work in teams and so on. And so I guess the advice is very similar in that it is very important to keep up with the technology. And so you may have a favorite language today, and it may be fine to be your favorite language and only language and framework that you are familiar with for the last 5 years, let's say. But if you have not kept up, if you are just constantly staying with the same technology, same team and same framework, it may be wise to kind of like venture out a little bit, consider other ways of doing things, consider other ways of designing the same system, because I mean, things do change very quickly. And speaking as someone who has been in the industry for some time, things, I mean, 20 years ago, how you do design things is very different from now, right? So it is very important to keep up.
Definitely 100% agree on there. And then, speaking of like staying up to date with with our technology, like I just was really curious, like, how do you stay up to date with the latest technology? What resources do you use? Like,
I think going to kind of conferences and stuff like that, I mean, that's one way, or a webinar, or other kind of live events. That's one way. I mean, but there are also, I mean, a lot of articles that you can read, and just like also like looking at open source projects, right? And often I find, like, especially as someone who kind of like manages technology and teams for it, I think think choosing the right technology to use is very, very important. Because I mean, let's say that you choose one framework over the other. Maybe that framework it is superior, but the relative popularity of the frameworks really affects how your ability to hire talent. Really affects the long term kind of sustainability of the project that you one of those things. And so keeping yourself kind of in touch with the industry and knowing like how the framework in terms of popularity is trending is very important. And so I mean like you can do that in a number of ways. Oftentimes I just do kind of organic search and see what type of results come out. But being on top of that, very, very.
I see. What are some things that you're currently learning?
What are some of the things that I am currently learning?
Yeah.
I'll be transparent. I think so. I joined later, actually, not too long ago, and so there are specific technology that I didn't spend too much time on past. One of which is Ruby on Rails, and so my last place that I was at, mostly doing Scala, mostly doing TypeScript and Angular, and later we on the back end, we use Ruby on Rails, and so that's kind of one of the things that it's not very deep technology or anything like that that you have to learn from scratch. There's some transferable knowledge that I can borrow from other languages or frameworks that I am familiar with, but it's an example of like things that I am currently learning.
Awesome. So just the last question is like, do you have any any frequent asked questions that you want to clarify to the audience, or maybe there's something that you have in mind throughout this conversation that you want to bring up? You can mention it here as well.
Yeah, I would say frequently asked question. And I think one frequently asked question is like, given that, there's so much work or, so much, I guess, different work that one has to do as a manager compared to, being an IC, it's still worthwhile, being a manager. And so going back to kind of some of the things that we already covered, in terms of, if you're expecting you necessarily get a lot more pay, that is not really the case. If you're expecting infinite power control, that's not really the case. And so what are some of the things that are really kind of stand out as things that I enjoy? So that's kind of like one of the questions that I get a lot, and I would say it goes back to something that I mentioned before, which is like the impact, right? So impact to the organization, impact to the business, and it's a very good feeling, with when you see kind of the organization that you're part of, the teams that you're leading, that they are successful, and almost like their success is what kind of like a reflection of your own success, and so so that's something that I would encourage like anyone who's considering a kind of a manager's path to think about, like, is that something that they truly enjoy? And if so, by all means, that probably the leadership path is right for you. If not, maybe there are other considerations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.